Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here at the masterclass with Allison Otto. This is part of the 32nd Woods Hole Film Festival, and today is day 3. How many of you have seen all the films that we've been screening so far? Bummer for you. Bummer for you. I always say if you see all the films in the festival, we'll give you a pass for next year's festival, but no pass for you. Oh, well. So the Woods Hole Film Festival is known for screening films by emerging independent filmmakers. We select them from around 1,000 films that we receive from around the world. And from those film submissions, we select this year 111 films that we are presenting over the 8 days. Of those films, 26 are feature documentaries, 20 are narrative features, and the rest are short films. We try and select a program that we think is unique. It also reflects the ethos of this festival, which is supporting filmmakers to have their work seen in front of audiences and to create a community for the 8 days of the festival. The in-person part of the festival takes place through next Saturday. And then next Sunday starts the virtual part of the festival, which goes through August 13th. All the information is available on our website, woodsholefilmfestival.org, and there's a lot happening this week. So I hope if you're here for the week, you'll take part in as much of it as you can. About 10 years ago, we recognized that in addition to watching films, people like to come together during this week and learn as well. So we started a program bringing filmmakers here who have been recognized for their work, recognized for the excellence of their work, and who we feel would really bring something unique to the festival and share their ideas and their work with people who want to learn. This year's filmmaker in residence is Allison Otto. Alice has been here with 2 of her films. The Love Bugs was here 3 years ago. 2019, yeah, I'm just like blanking out on the whole pandemic. And then last year and this year, we've shown The Thief Collector. And so Allison's background and journey as a filmmaker, I'm gonna let her talk about it. But when we were talking about what would she talk about in her masterclass, we kind of settled on the thing that is really interesting about her work is character-driven storytelling. And in documentaries, not always that easy to do. You have to pick the right topic. You have to pick the right people. So for the next 90 minutes, Allison will talk. She'll present some things on the screen here, and then I'm sure she'll open it up for questions at the end. And just a reminder, please silence your cell phones. And we are recording this. All right, take it away.
Water first. Okay. It's so great to see how many people turned out for this on a Monday. So I am extremely passionate about character-driven documentary storytelling, and hopefully you are too. And if you're not, hopefully after this class you'll give it a second look. So in this masterclass, we will define a character-driven documentary, go over how to find a character that will really make your story stick, look at how to make use of storytelling tools that traditionally have been used in the narrative space, but we're going to adapt them to documentaries in the documentary story arc. And finally, we're going to go over how to bring it all together to create a really memorable character-driven story that captivates viewers. And at the end, hopefully if you got those printed out, we have a checklist of recommendations of the greatest character-driven documentaries of all time. I had reached out to, I think there are about 50 plus people that responded across the industry with their favorite character-driven documentaries. So it creates like a fun movie watching checklist. So if you stick around to the end, we've got the list back there, and we're also going to do a digital copy. And if you can save your questions for the end, that would be awesome so that we can get through all of these clips, which I'm really excited about. So first, my background. It's a little non-traditional. I started out as a newspaper sports reporter. So after college, I covered the Los Angeles Dodgers and a bunch of other professional sports, so like the NHL, the NBA, the NFL. I even did some badminton. And then so I transitioned into doing digital journalism content because I found that newspaper reporting, newspapers were struggling, and the issue I encountered was that the amount of space that you could use to tell a story kept getting smaller and smaller. And so I started doing, like digital journalism for outlets like the Travel Channel, Lonely Planet, National Geographic, the BBC. And then I decided to branch out a little more. So I made my first film in 2013, which was Keeper of the Mountains, and it was a character-driven documentary about a really feisty 88-year-old woman who was the world's foremost authority on Himalayan mountaineering. And even though she'd never climbed a mountain herself, she was renowned for making the world's most domineering mountaineers quake in their boots. And she could tell when one of them was maybe trying to fudge their accomplishments, and she would really put them in their place. So I traveled to Kathmandu, where she was living, to do that. And that was done on a shoestring budget. So I learned a lot doing that by lugging the camera around myself in Kathmandu and just making my way through that. So then in 2019, I did The Love Bugs. And the tagline for that story was that it was a story about the love of nature and the nature of love. And it screened at Woods Hole in 2019 and won an Emmy in the doc short category in 2021. And we'll see a couple moments from that later on. And then last year, The Thief Collector, which was a true crime, character-driven documentary about two retired married school teachers who likely pulled off one of the most confounding art heists of the 20th century. And the book of short stories written by the male thief, the husband, before his death, that are basically a roadmap of the crime and his psyche. And now I'm developing a character-driven true crime documentary that's based on a Washington State cold case that was solved using genetic genealogy. It was the first time genetic genealogy was used to convict a killer at trial. So before I define a character-driven documentary, I think we need to go over what I consider to be the 6 main types of documentaries that I see most often now in filmmaking. And the lines between these types can often be blurred, and not everyone is going to agree that these types exist. Basically, documentary types are a spectrum. It makes for a fun conversation when people try to decide what type of documentary you're watching. But this is what I see most often. And I'm going to go into detail about each one. But so they are expository, observational, issue-driven, participatory, hybrid, and then I tossed in investigative, because we see so much of that now in the true crime space. So expository, these are the voice of God documentaries. So anything like the Ken Burns traditional PBS documentary that you see, like his history of the Civil War or the history of baseball. Other examples would be March of the Penguins, or something like Room 237. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's about Stanley Kubrick's version of The Shining and all of the conspiracy theories that surround it. So observational films, these films just observe. The filmmaker and the camera just follow the story wherever it goes, and it's very cinema verite. So examples would be Hoop Dreams, 76 Days, which we're going to see a clip from, and my all-time favorite American Movie, which we're going to see too at the end. And then issue-driven, these are pretty straightforward. they just focus on an issue. So like Under the Gun was about gun reform. The Crime of the Century was about the corruption of big pharma and the fentanyl trade. And then The Dark Side of Social Media was the issue in the social dilemma. And then participatory. This is where the documentary filmmaker inserts themselves in the story, or they are a crucial part of it. So think about like Michael Moore in Bowling for Columbine. And okay, so over the years, most of what has been popularized in this participatory genre has been the perspective of white men. Just, it's been what it is. There are outliers like Agnes Sparta, but later I'm going to show an example of how this approach can really work when the voice of the filmmaker creating the participatory documentary moves beyond the traditional male gaze in this genre. And then the next one is hybrid. This is a very cool type. It's probably my favorite. This is a documentary that moves between modes. So it combines traditional documentary filmmaking with narrative elements, fantasy, animation, magical realism. And I don't mean just a small reenactment. The blend has to be really central to the story. And it's often like walking a tightrope to pull it off, but when it's done right, it can be really, really beautiful. So some examples would be Kirsten Johnson's Dick Johnson is Dead, or Elaine McMillan Sheldon's King Cole, which is here at the festival, and I highly recommend it. I think she's one of the most exciting new documentary filmmakers out there. And then investigative. I think this is the bucket into which true crime most often falls. So character-driven examples in this space would be The Staircase docuseries, which is a classic, Tiger King, All Be Gone in the Dark. Basically, the filmmaker is investigating a story, usually a crime, and the investigation is crucial to the story. I think character-driven stories can be the approach through which almost all of these modes of documentary storytelling are executed. It's probably more difficult with expository. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head where that worked, but okay, so what is a character-driven story? It's one in which the story progresses through the eyes of or because of the actions of the lead characters or character. And in these stories, the events and the conflicts arise from the characters' goals, their motivations, and their interactions. If you eliminate the character from the story, there is no story. And that's usually like the baseline of how you're able to tell if you're watching a character-driven documentary. For example, if you remove Jerry and Rita Alter, the thieves from The Thief Collector, there's no documentary. Or if you remove Alexei Navalny from the documentary Navalny, which was the Oscar-winning doc this year, there would be no documentary. And by the end of a character-driven film, the viewer should, if it's effective, should feel like they more deeply understand the main character, even if they don't necessarily sympathize with that person. For example, with the true crime docuseries The Jinx, which was about Robert Durst, who's a very disturbed individual. By the end, I felt like I had a deeper understanding of his psyche and his logic, but I in no way sympathized with him. In fact, I found him even creepier. And the main character doesn't always have to be human. So one of my favorite lead characters in a character-driven documentary is from a doc called Stray, and it's seen from the viewpoint of dogs. So it's a street dog is the main character. Robots can be main characters. There's Goodnight Oppie, which is about the Opportunity rover on Mars. And as a counterexample, Ken Burns's The Civil War, for example, is not a character-driven documentary. There's no one central character who's also sometimes called the guide or the cornerstone character, who represents the lens through which the story progresses. At the end of that series, I felt like it felt like a university lesson to me, which was really valuable. but there was no singular character who really drove the story from start to finish. So we'll talk briefly about how I find characters that fascinate me. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I mostly find my characters by reading. I read. I read newspapers, magazines, news sites, blogs, and I listen to a ton of audiobooks and podcasts. I'm always listening to something. I actually discovered the true crime character-driven one I'm working on now by listening to the audiobook, and then my manager reached out to the author on my behalf, and that's how we started the conversation to get that film in development. The Thief Collector started with an article I read on the Smithsonian website about the recovery of this painting, and that it was found, in the home of these two unassuming school teachers. Keeper of the Mountains originated from a magazine article I read in Outside Magazine. The Love Bugs originated from a story I read on NPR website. You can also find your story through a community you're already involved in, or an issue you care about, or through someone you meet in general. And then my second step after that is I do more research. Is there anyone else doing a documentary about this person? Is there a similar documentary already out there? Especially if you're thinking of a documentary about an issue you'd like to highlight through a character's experience. You want to double check that there isn't something similar out there. And do the research to find out. It'll save you a ton of time and money and a ton of anxiety in the end if you do the work ahead of time to figure out, and you can figure out usually just by Googling. And I'm just going to share a couple of character-driven stories I would recommend not doing, because a lot of first-time filmmakers end up considering these kinds of stories, and I want to save you the time by just advising you not to do these ones, and if you disregard my advice if you want. So an example would be multiple first-time filmmakers have decided that they're going to hop in a van with a camera and go on a road trip. So it's the road trip film where they make a documentary about the people they encounter along the way. And all of these filmmakers, they often feel like they're telling a unique story, but I can tell you this film's been done again and again and again, and it was done by authors even before that. Another example of a story to avoid, it would be people who decide to tell a character-driven story about someone's trek. So like a trek across Everest, a trek across Antarctica, cycling across Canada. Even if it's a new route, this type of story is done a lot. So before you take next steps with your story, ask yourself these hard questions, which is this new? Why would people choose to watch your film? And why should this story be told? Why should you invest so much time and effort and money into it? And after all of that research and asking yourself the hard questions, if you still want to pursue the story, what I do is I'll reach out via email or either directly to the person I'm interested in filming or to someone who can connect me with that person and who can vouch for me if needed. Having someone who can vouch for you is really key. Okay, so I'm going to talk about casting. Yes, this is documentary, but you're still casting, in essence, when you're thinking about your main character or an ensemble of characters. And the basic common denominator, I think, of all compelling characters is that they are all passionate about something, and they are all great storytellers in one way or another. And that doesn't always have to be verbally. Are they truthful storytellers? Well, that's debatable, and that's up for you as the director to figure out. Very few people I found are 100% reliable as narrators. And sometimes the character skills as a storyteller are conveyed through their actions rather than their words. So if possible, before you fully commit to making someone your central character, do a test shoot with them. And when you watch the footage, are you mesmerized by them? Do they make you feel some sort of intense emotion, whether that's joy or anger, laughter or sadness? And I would say film your character during that test shoot in as many situations as possible, and definitely film them in a moment when they're silent. Because when someone isn't talking, I feel like that's when they often reveal who they really are and how they feel. Then I'd say ask a few trusted friends to check out your footage. Do they find the character interesting? Get their feedback, because sometimes as filmmakers, we can't see the forest for the trees. We're so interested in a character, but we realize a lot of other people aren't. So that's kind of a gauge that. And I would say my tip one, look beyond the loudest person in the room. Some people say that your character should be the most performative one in the room, and they equate that with the character who's the loudest. I think many of the most mesmerizing people are the ones who are not the loudest or most outwardly performative. They can be soft-spoken, like Jan, the paramedic from Elaine McMillan Sheldon's Heroine. Or they can be unwittingly humorous and endearing, like Lois and Charlie O'Brien in The Love Bugs, and you'll see a clip of them. But regardless of whether or not they're loud, they all do have some sort of ineffable quality, some sort of it factor, and you'll be able to sense it when you see it. So we're going to look at the first example of this. This is the trailer from The Mole Agent, which is one of my favorites. So quick synopsis: a private investigator in Chile hires an elderly widower named Sergio to be a mole at a retirement home where a client of the private investigator suspects the caretakers of elder abuse. And the documentary crew was already embedded there. The residents had given permission. The crew told the retirement home that they were interested in following a new resident. And so then they brought Sergio in as their mole slash spy. And the retirement home didn't know Sergio was their spy. And so he was, in essence, cast for the role when the private investigator was deciding who to hire. So we'll show the trailer for that one.
Contra Mercurio y veo un aviso que decía: se necesitan personas de 80, 90 años. Estoy loco, ¿qué diablo? Porque no me convencía de 80, 90 años.
Tú, a contar de hoy día, vas a ser un agente topo, un espía. A mí me está contratando una hija. Cree que a su madre adentro la están maltratando, que le están robando. Entonces tú vas a ser mis ojos. Yeah. Todo me sirve. Los baños están asquerosos, que la enfermera, cachuchazos, y escobazos, qué sé yo, todo me lo informa.
Informe de hoy, miércoles 29. Rómulo, contabilicé 40 mujeres y 4 hombres, incluyéndome. Todas las señoras me parecen iguales.
Pero no es tan viejo. Es viudo, dice.
Sergio. A las 18 horas estuve vigilando para que le dieran el remedio y no se lo dieron.
Ahí no.
No.
¿Y acá?
Llore. Eso le hace bien, llore nomás.
¿Me quiere? ¿Mucho? ¿Poquito? Nada. ¿Me quiere? Mucho.
Está lista la encomienda.
Mándame un mensaje de voz por WhatsApp.
So this kind of film could have easily become exploitative and profoundly sad, but with Sergio as the cornerstone, there's a certain sweetness and poignancy to the story, and he brings that sweetness out in his fellow retirement home residents. And I think The Mole Agent is a perfect example of how to tackle a tough topic with warmth and humanity. So we're going to talk about a participatory documentary, and my tip for that would be to get personal. Early I mentioned participatory documentaries historically having been centered predominantly through the eye of the white male, so like Michael Moore, Werner Herzog, Nick Broomfield, Louis Theroux, Ross McElvey, and Brian Fogel, who directed Icarus, and that's just to name a few. But these next couple examples, we're going to look at how powerful two participatory documentaries can be when that traditional lens is expanded to a viewpoint beyond what's been historically prevalent in this genre, and when the filmmakers tell it through the lens of their personal experience. Both of these films deal with broader political stories, but because each woman is telling it through her own lived experience, they're able to go much further beyond the headlines. So the first trailer we're going to watch is from a film called For Sama. It's a film made by Wad al-Khatib, a Syrian woman who became a mother while living with her medic husband in Aleppo, Syria during the war. She carried her camera everywhere as a citizen journalist and because she wanted a historical record of everything. And she ultimately assembles her film for her baby daughter, Sama, to explain to her why they stayed behind in Aleppo when so many others were fleeing. So.
بحلب مدينتي. لسه عم صور. هذا الشيء اللي عم بيخلي معنى لوجودي. ما حدا منا كان عنده أي فكرة كيف رح تتغير حياتنا للأبد. حمزة أنا حامل. سما سما عملت هالفيلم مشانك. بدي إياك تفهمي شو اللي كنا عم نقاتل مشانه. بحبك كثير أكثر من أشو في ضرب كثير اليوم. سما أنا بعرف إنك عم تفهمي شو عم بصير. بقدر أشوف هالشي بعيونك. ما عم تبكي مثل أي طفل عادي. هذا الشيء اللي عم يحرق لي قلبي. سما رح تسامحيني؟
My second example in this participatory genre is from Nanfu Wang's One Child Nation, which explores her experience growing up under China's one-child policy and the moral and ethical complexities she feels now that she's a mother herself. And Nanfu is an amazing, amazing storyteller. I think she is also one of the best emerging filmmakers. And one of the reasons this particular participatory documentary works is, again, that it's so personal for her.
When my mom was born, her parents named her Zhao Di, which means bringing a younger brother soon. She later helped her younger brother abandon his daughter in the market so he could try again for a son.
7张等于如果是见到导演图，你敢出那些不行噻，说算了不行噻，说算骗我晓得噻，我就跟阿公整个拿张罗一杠，只要3摆上上，杠得到院度盖上去，杠到院度盖上就扯到那个牛站上，扯到牛站上，你要报的120块钱吧，那等于报个那个报的120块钱放在那里，结果都在那里看，就在院图盖上2年2夜，没有人领。 面上就钉一面个包，觉得爱过牙噻，那就慢慢就来死了的嘛。
到你就死了。
到你就死了。
真的。
到你死了的，那就买来的嘛。
哦。
慢就买点啥就上去的嘛。
我冇玩哭了好久啊，还是跟他送那些。
夜班我在院头那里，我话就是眼里不得干，放在那里。
我个该当你娘，直接洗澡里哭3分钟，心都痛死了的，你真治得到哦那些干的。
妈的，牙不要死嘛，给他就死嘛，给他们留着给才过来，我就死，给他要不我就卡死给去，给我再就死。我话把那个家好多条命到嘛，还晓得讲我紧死了。
Yeah, that one's pretty powerful, and I think that's an example of how wonderful and compelling and effective a participatory documentary can be. So my next tip is to think outside the box when you're deciding how to reveal your character. We're going to show an example of a character-driven documentary series that really breaks the mold. It's one of my favorites. We're going to show the trailer for Wormwood, which is a character-driven investigative hybrid documentary series directed by the great Errol Morris. A little bit of backstory about what this docu-series is about. It's about the mysterious 1953 death of Frank Olson, who was a civilian scientist and a CIA employee who was unwittingly given LSD and who was profoundly troubled when he discovered that the CIA was experimenting with mind-controlled drugs and potentially also experimenting with biological warfare. So he's one of the main characters. And then his son, Eric Olson, is the other main character. Eric has spent about 60 years trying to get to the bottom of how and why his father's mysterious death happened. This docuseries came out in 2017, and Errol Morris's approach to the story kind of rankled people who have more traditional ideas of what qualifies as a documentary. To give us some examples of like how far out of the box he went with this, with his approach, he took the official documents the CIA released about what happened, which was hundreds of pages of first-person accounts, summaries, and other documentation that outlined the last 10 days of Frank Olson's life, and he used those to create fully fleshed out scenes that really reveal Frank's personality, and these scenes had dialogue to the point that there's almost like an Alfred Hitchcock film wrapped within a traditional documentary. And these scenes feature, just like a Hitchcock film, they feature a lot of silhouettes and off-kilter compositions that gave the viewer this feeling that something sinister is happening underneath the characters' conversations. He really builds a sense of paranoia, which is fitting with the story and fitting with what Frank Olson was feeling. And then on the documentary side of it, the whole thing starts to feel unnerving, like an LSD trip. The DP, director of photography, used up to 10 cameras for the interviews, and they're all in sorts of odd angles, and positioned these panes of glass in front of the camera to create like this double vision effect so that you would feel like you were, like something was wrong, that you were potentially on drugs too. And then the interviews were done in this empty warehouse that gave a really chilling effect and kind of made you feel like an CIA interrogation room kind of a thing. And then he did some seriously layered collaging with the archival. He used a ton of different aspect ratios, And then he intercuts scenes from the old version of Hamlet into the film, because Eric Olson has become, in essence, Hamlet trying to avenge his father's death. And the whole thing is bonkers, and I love it. And it's a perfect example of how to think really creatively when you're trying to reveal who your character is and bring out their personality. So I think the trailer really shows a lot of what you'll see.
What were you told at the time of your father's death?
I was told that your father has had an accident. But that was the cover story, told by the CIA. My father, Frank Olson, was an Army scientist. His research group had a relationship with the CIA. They take him to New York Tuesday morning, early Saturday morning, he's dead. What was my father doing? What was the CIA doing? What happened there?
The released CIA documents deal with a project codenamed MK-Ultra.
There was in it a story of a CIA experiment on an unwitting civilian who was given LSD.
You're the one on stage tonight, Dr. Olson.
You're all a bunch of jokers.
This has been the shift from thinking that my father's death was a mysterious suicide to knowing that it was a CIA atrocity.
This is 1975. There were a lot of questions about the integrity of the U.S. government.
The government was so eager to shut this down.
The tragedy that happened to the family was very deep and very real.
Eric's whole life has been sucked into this terrible hole.
The CIA was using LSD on people, but I think the real bad was something worse. He's a man that was profoundly distressed about what he was learning.
Startling new information.
Frank Olson, a former CIA scientist, may have been murdered.
If you thought somebody was detrimental, you would have no problem dealing with him.
But then the question is, who ordered that?
The United States began to do things which put its own democratic institutions in great jeopardy. And my father was in the center of that.
Frank was somebody who has secrets, and he was dangerous. I can't tell you more.
That series so many times. So that leads me to kind of my next tip, which is to really think very thoroughly through the storytelling and stylistic approach before you begin formally filming. And I know that's not always possible, but for the types of stories I tell, before I begin filming, I like to create a lookbook and some comps. Even if it's just for myself, it helps keep me focused and on track. The Love Bugs was done on a shoestring budget as well, but there was still a lookbook before I started filming. So once you've found the story and the great character, really think about how your stylistic approaches would really lean heavily into amplifying the power of this story. I like to ask myself, what tone should I go for with this? What color palette even feels like the character in the story? What kind of framing would evoke the mood, and what kind of camera lenses would really help with that style. And so when I'm dreaming this up, I like to pretend that I have a limitless budget and can do anything. And then I try to replicate a cheaper version of that limitless budget. And then I also like to think about comps. What films are stylistically comparable or comparable in story approach to what I'm dreaming up? Even I think about like what artists, regardless of whether they're narrative directors or documentarians or even authors, have been the biggest influence on my own style in general, and would that be applicable to the story I'm thinking about? So The Love Bugs was about two really colorful elderly entomologists and their beloved bug collection. They'd quietly put together the world's largest private collection of insects over the course of, I think it was 60 years. They had 1.25 million insects, and I followed that journey as they decided to give their beloved insects away. So the comp was Wes Anderson meets a vintage hand-illustrated field journal. I love the old biological field journals, and one of the entomologists kept his field journals from the 1950s. So I wanted to incorporate illustrations and animation that felt like the viewer was looking at an old field journal. And I wanted the film to have bold colors in keeping with the bold colors of the insects, and to amplify the quirkiness of the entomologists, because they were very, very quirky. So when I was there with the entomologists and I was, holding the camera and filming the verite, I tried as much as possible, knowing these comps in my head, I tried to keep things really center framed, the way Wes Anderson does, and to go with a sense of symmetry as much as possible while still allowing it to feel natural, and knowing that they might suddenly move and then I'd have to adapt as well. And I mostly used a wide-angle lens with Charlie and Lois to kind of help with that sort of composition. And then I used a macro lens for the bugs to make them larger than life and to really bring out their colors. Charlie and Lois, they also tended to move in unison and to finish each other's sentences. And so the Wes Anderson comp felt very appropriate as well for amplifying that habit that they had. And then the comp for the music was the animated film Up, which I love. And so we'll show the first couple minutes so you can get a sense of how all those things played together.
Hair, check.
Your hair's okay.
Well, it does tend to fly. I did go outside, and it does tend to go so.
That's better. I've got a lot of very beautiful insects, but this pair is very special and very distinct. This is gemens and the other is gematas. And they're the two most beautiful I have.
Oh, I didn't think that was the most beautiful.
Yeah, but you didn't look at it under a scope. You notice that we don't always agree. My name is Charles O'Brien. I'm a retired professor of entomology and have been studying weevils for 60 years.
And I'm Lois O'Brien, Charlie's wife, and I've been studying plant hoppers for almost that long.
This is a group of Philippine weevils that show great diversity in color and pattern, and they've been called clown weevils because they look as if they've been painted just the way the clowns paint their face.
These are some of my favorites because they have fancy noses. I like them because they're different. They're easy to sort. They're easy to identify. We estimate that we have 1.25 million dead insects mounted and labeled.
And we have thousands of species, no question. We've collected in more than 70 countries and all of the continents. That's dangerous as hell. God.
Well, this is the heavy one.
Yeah, but this one...
Can you see?
Keep it away from the edge here.
When they fight, they use these horns to fight each other.
And I'm going to go sit down because my back...
And I'm going to take this out of here so it won't break anything. You could have them again if you want them, but not now. Oh.
Now, I know this can't be done with all films where you try to create these lookbooks and stuff ahead of time, because sometimes when a director is filming during a war or with a film like For Sama, it's all unfolding rapidly and you're embedded in it. But I still encourage you to think about every story like a screenplay, and I'll explain what that means in a documentary context. So I was really fortunate to work with documentary screenwriter Mark Monroe, who's been involved in a number of Oscar-nominated films. And he worked with me on The Thief Collector, and I wanted to share some things I learned from him. He said that documentary film is a manipulation to create a story, and that you have to embrace that. You as the director ultimately choose what stays in the film and what goes, and a great editor can make a moment from life look much more dramatic and exciting than it might have been in that particular moment. And at no point in the final story is everything unfolding just like it did in real life. On a very basic level, for instance, I discarded all the times that I tripped over things while filming The Love Bugs. Even small things like that are moments from real life that are ultimately omitted from the story because they don't further the story. And documentary screenwriting is about creating a story and story world and mapping your story out in a 3-act structure. And this is really important. So this is the big takeaway from this. In Act 1, you want to establish the world, which are the main characters, the inciting incident, the movie's theme. In Act 2, you want to raise the stakes, leading to the midpoint. And this can be the hardest act to flesh out. And so sometimes it can help to establish the midpoint beat and then work outwards from there, either direction. And then in Act 3, you want to resolve the story. The main characters realized what they need to do to accomplish their goal. They gather the necessary tools. Ideally, you can toss in another twist, which, like, without giving spoilers, there's a massive twist with the pastor in The Overnighters. And there was a massive twist in The Thief Collector that we discovered towards the end of filming, which appears in our final act. And then you've got, how the characters decide to respond to this twist. There's a climax and a resolution, and then the closing moments. And what I like to do with the closing moments is sometimes I think it can be poetic to have the key opening image be the flip side of the key closing image. So, but this image now has new meaning now that the story is played out. And an example of that was The Thief Collector, where the key image of the opening moments is the image of the 2 slick thieves from Jerry Alter's Book of Stories staring at the painting kind of greedily. And then the key closing image is the 2 men who ended up being the heroes of the story who returned the painting, and they're looking at the empty frame that they were allowed to keep. Same sort of framing that we did. Now, because I'm a documentary director, I don't always have the luxury of a narrative director. So I liken it to, when I try to explain how I do this to people, I'm basically like, I call it standing in the center of the multiverse, and you're trying to see all of the possible paths and outcomes that, my story might take before they happen in real life. And without fail, I won't see all of them happen. Again, I mentioned what happened with The Thief Collector. There was this big moment that none of us saw coming, and we had to adjust on the fly. And again, that also happened to the director of The Overnighters. He wasn't expecting that as well. And there was this twist that upended his story, and he really had to sort of adapt. So again, when that happens, you have to step back into the center of the multiverse and take another look at the paths and possible outcomes now that things have shifted. And you try to figure out, how do I adjust what I film next? And I do that constantly with every film. Mark, he likes to keep note cards on a wall and move them around as the story changes. I like doing it in Google Docs as long as you sort of have some sort of way that you do that. We also try to think about what are the 5 to 10 beats that absolutely must happen in the story, what definitely has to happen in Act 1. What is the inciting incident? What are the possibilities for the turning point? What emotion do we definitely want people to have, to feel as they move from scene to scene? You know, some filmmakers will just show up with a camera and no concrete approach really, and just film someone that interests them and then hope that something comes of it. And I can say that that can get really expensive and very time consuming. And verite films can be so unpredictable, and that's why it's even more important to really craft with intention and to try to plan ahead. My next tip is to kick off the film with an opening that really hooks viewers right away. This comes from my days as a newspaper journalist, but it's also something that Mark stresses as well because he comes from that journalism background too. As a journalist, I needed the opening sentences to be so compelling and so strong that the reader would continue to read the story, and sometimes I only had a couple of sentences available to make that happen. You know, when the editors only allotted a certain length to the stories. So we're going to take a look at one of the strongest examples of a really memorable, powerful opening hook. We're going to show the opening first 3 minutes or so of 76 Days, which is about the opening days of the COVID outbreak as experienced by medical workers and their patients in Wuhan. Somehow these filmmakers got access to film inside the hospital, inside 4 hospitals. And this film is an ensemble, character-driven, observational documentary example.
我要守我爸爸，我要守我爸爸。我们会让你从哪里？我守到最后一层。会让你从哪里？你本来身体都不好，你现在人家说头脑不好。给你这么多天了，得到你照顾。没事。你好好平复一下，因为你也工作那么长的时间了，我就是怕你工作压力太大了。你一定要好好调节自己，好吧？你坐一会儿吧。在哪里？在哪里面？在哪里面？这个。让我再进去看我爸爸最后一眼。爸爸，你永远都在我心里面，永远都在。爸爸。爸爸。我不走，我要看到我爸爸。我要走他，走他。走的，你不能太激动了，你激动一会儿缺氧的话，我们是吧没办法的，好不好？因为家里面还有其他家属，好不好？你要听我的好不好？对你如果太激动，每天都是一种高压状态，也很难，也很痛苦的。你真的你倒下，我们不知道怎么办。不然下午不要上班了。 也见不到我爸爸了。
我儿女，你把我带进心里。
再也见不到我爸爸了。我要和爸爸唱歌，我要替他唱歌。你让我看他一眼，我求求你了。爸爸，爸爸。
So that's one of the most powerful opening scenes I think I've ever seen in a documentary. And it's the kind of scene you watch and you just want to keep watching and see what happens and to see the documentation of what was going on. So in closing, I'll say that my advice is just advice. You know, you as the director have to make your own creative decisions. You have immense power as the storyteller to dictate what the moment looked like. You're the dreamers of the dream, so to speak. And I think it's important to get proficient in some storytelling guidelines, like the ones I suggested. But to quote Pablo Picasso, I think you should learn the rules like a pro so that you can break them like an artist. And we're going to close out with the trailer for American Movie. And the reason for this is, have you guys seen it? Has anyone seen it? Okay. I think it's something that all of us as filmmakers can sympathize with, no matter how experienced we get as filmmakers. So this film was made back in, I believe, 1999 or 1998. And it's about a guy in Milwaukee who has these dreams that he's going to be the next great American filmmaker directing the next great horror film. And except he has no money and he has his family or the actors in his film and he can't get them to participate. And it's just a series of one mistake after another and he just keeps going. So.
That was wicked, man.
His whole life is making this one film.
You have 2 hours tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and be an extra in a film. You get your name on the credits, man, as a producer. And of course, there'll be a whole crowd of people here, so we gotta make like a line where people can't go. Have a hell of a lot of assistant directors saying, hey, could you step back like 5 feet? I think my mom's gonna have to end up going out in the woods.
I have my shot thing to do.
Okay, you gotta spread apart that way. All of the extras have just fell through, except for Mike Schenk right there.
We used to do a lot of partying together, but I don't party anymore.
Hey, Mike, make sure everyone has brown gloves.
Does everyone have brown gloves?
No, dude. I'm broke, man. I gotta get gas tomorrow. And dude's talking about making a feature film.
The name of the film is Coven.
Coven.
Coven, that's the proper pronunciation.
No. Coven sounds like oven, man, and that's just, it doesn't work. She wants to be in your film, Bill.
Oh my gosh.
You get your $3 grand back. It's the first line of the film, man. It's gotta be on the money.
It's all right.
Okay, I believe we can do this.
Shot 37 here where my head goes through the cover. Every time we got together, there was something that seemed to go wrong.
Go, man! Oh, dude. I'm sorry you tried to put your head in this. Cut. Take 30. Cut. You gotta watch your teeth, too, because they clack a little bit when they loosen up in the mouth.
Oh, now I see there's a frame there.
Oh, no. What are you talking about, Ma? Check it out when you look at the scarecrows. You get it? Within weeks, the film will be cut, finished for multiple sales. What do you think about that?
Multiple sales to who?
We get to see Americans and American dreams, and you won't walk away depressed after seeing this. This whole thing is turned into a theatrical mockery. Do you understand that, Mike?
No.
Well, you will. Would you buy this movie for $14.95?
Hell yeah, man.
If I can find 3,000 people like you across this country, man, I'm in business.
One of the greatest characters of all time. So yeah, I'm gonna open it up to questions, and thoughts.
I never thought of, thanks. I didn't think about documentary filmmaking in terms of like screenwriting, like a narrative film with, you know, the big beats and inciting and stuff. So if you plan out your film that way, are you essentially directing your subjects as if you would direct actors, or how do you get your big beats to fall in line?
Often it's a matter of predicting what might happen. And I think one of the easiest ways to see what's going to happen is if you're following an event. So, for instance, Hoop Dreams follows a season. Spellbound follows a spelling bee. So you know there's going to be, there are beats that you know are going to happen. And once you get to know your characters, you get a sense of how they're going to react in those situations. So no, I don't direct them, but it's a matter of starting to get almost a little, not clairvoyant about what's going to happen, but you start to know them so well that you can predict what they're going to do.
Is that because you've like spent a lot of time with them and done a lot of research before you start filming?
A lot of research, yeah. And I like to do stories that have some sort of event to them, like the O'Briens and the Love Bugs. Their story arc was they were giving away their collection and how they felt about that and that journey. The Thief Collector was about this book of stories that the thief wrote, his act, how that impacted his family and those around him, and then the restoration of the painting was its own B story arc. That makes sense, I hope.